He looked at my check, looked at my face, and tore it in half. "People like you don't have $4 million, he said. He didn't know who I really was. He didn't know my boss was standing right behind me. And he definitely didn't know what was about to happen next. If you've ever walked into a room and felt people judging you before you even opened your mouth, stay with me till the end of this video, because what happened to me that day changed everything I thought I knew about respect, about power, and about being underestimated. And if this story moves you, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with just one word, judged. I want to see how many of us have lived through this. My name doesn't matter. What matters is who I was on that Tuesday morning and who I became by the end of it. I was 34 years old and I had spent the last 10 years of my life building something most people never got to see. I wasn't flashy. I didn't wear designer clothes. I drove an old car with a cracked side mirror I kept forgetting to fix. I packed my lunch in a brown paper bag every single day. If you passed me on the street, you would not have looked twice. And that was fine with me because I never worked for attention. I worked for results. I had started as an assistant at a small consulting firm nearly a decade earlier, back when the company operated out of a tiny office above a laundromat. I answered phones, I made coffee. I filed papers nobody else wanted to touch, but I paid attention. I learned everything about that business, every deal, every client, every mistake, every win. And slowly, patiently, I climbed. Not because someone handed me anything, but because I made myself impossible to overlook, even when people tried their best to overlook me anyway. By the time this story happened, I was the head of operations for a company that had grown into something powerful, a business worth hundreds of millions of dollars, with contracts across 3 states. And the woman who built that company from nothing, the woman who gave me my very first chance when nobody else would, had just closed the biggest deal of her career, a $4 million deal. And because she trusted me, because she always trusted me, she handed the check to me personally and asked me to deposit it before the bank closed that afternoon. "You've earned this too," she told me, sliding the check across her desk. "Half of this deal happened because of the groundwork you laid. I want you to be the one who walks it in." I remember holding that check in my hands and feeling something I can't quite explain. Pride, yes. But also a strange, quiet nervousness, the kind you feel when you know you're about to walk into a room where people will look at you and immediately decide who you are before you say a single word. I drove to the bank on my lunch break. I remember the sky was overcast that day, a soft gray color like the whole city was holding its breath. I walked in wearing simple black trousers and a plain blouse, my hair pulled back, no jewelry except a small pair of earrings my grandmother gave me years ago. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who worked hard and didn't need to prove that to anyone. The bank was quiet. A few customers stood in line. Soft music played somewhere in the background, the kind of music that's supposed to make you feel calm but instead makes everything feel a little too still. I walked up to the counter and a young teller greeted me politely enough. I handed her the check. She looked at it, her eyebrows lifting slightly, and she excused herself to speak with someone else. That's when the branch manager came out. He was a tall man, mid-40s maybe, wearing an expensive suit that fit him a little too perfectly, like he wanted you to notice it. He walked with the kind of confidence that comes from never once being questioned in a room. He took the check from the teller's hand and looked at it. Then he looked at me, and I watched his expression change in real time, like a door slowly closing. "Where did you get this?" he asked, and his tone wasn't curious, it was accusing. I explained calmly that I worked in operations for the company listed on the check, that my employer had authorized me to deposit it, that everything was legitimate and could easily be verified with one phone call. I kept my voice even. I kept my hands still. I had learned a long time ago that when people expect you to react with anger, staying calm is the most powerful thing you can do. But he wasn't listening. He was performing. Other customers in line had started to glance over, drawn by the tension in his voice. $4 million, he repeated, loud enough for the whole lobby to hear. "You expect me to believe someone just handed you a $4 million check?" I told him again, patiently, that he could call the number on the check, that he could verify everything in under 2 minutes. I even offered to wait to the side while he did it so he wouldn't feel pressured. He didn't call anyone. Instead, he looked at me the way you look at something you've already decided is a problem. And then, right there in front of everyone standing in that lobby, he tore the check in half. The sound of that paper ripping is something I don't think I'll ever forget. It wasn't loud, but it felt like it echoed through the entire building. A woman in line gasped softly. A teller froze mid-motion. And I just stood there looking at the torn pieces of paper on the counter, feeling something rise up in my chest that I refused to let show on my face. "People like you," he said, lowering his voice just slightly as if that made it less cruel, "don't walk in here with checks like this. If this were real, someone else would be bringing it in, not you." I didn't cry, I didn't yell. I have spent my whole life learning how to hold my composure in moments that were built to break it, so I simply looked at him and said, "You're going to regret saying that." And I meant every word. I picked up the torn pieces of the check, careful not to lose a single scrap, and I stepped to the side to call my boss. She didn't ask a single unnecessary question. She simply said, "I'm on my way, don't leave." 15 minutes later, the glass doors of the bank opened and she walked in. She wasn't loud about her presence. She never needed to be. She wore a simple charcoal blazer, low heels, minimal makeup, nothing that screamed wealth, but everything about the way she moved said she belonged wherever she chose to stand. She had built an empire from nothing, and you could feel that history in the way she carried herself, quiet and unshaken. The branch manager noticed her almost instantly. Something about her presence made people sit up straighter without knowing exactly why. He walked toward her, his whole demeanor transforming in the span of a few seconds. His posture straightened, his voice softened, he offered his hand. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can I help you today? Would you like a coffee while you wait?" I watched this happen and something inside me went very still. Just minutes earlier, he had torn apart proof of my honesty without a second glance. And now, faced with a different woman, a woman he assumed carried money simply because of how she looked, he had transformed into someone almost unrecognizable. My boss looked at him and then she looked past him directly at me. "I see you've already met my employee," she said calmly. The manager's smile faltered just slightly like a crack forming in glass. "I'm sorry, I don't quite understand. That torn check on your counter," she continued, her voice steady and clear, "was written by me to my company's account so that she could deposit it. She has worked for me for 10 years. She helped build the very deal that check represents. I trust her with more than $4 million because she has earned every bit of that trust." She paused, letting her words settle over the silence in the room. "And you tore it up in front of her and called her a liar because you looked at her and decided she didn't belong here." I will never forget the look on his face in that moment. It was the look of a man watching the ground shift beneath him in real time. He opened his mouth to explain, to apologize, to do anything that might undo what had already happened, but the words came out broken and stumbling. "I didn't know," he said. "I didn't realize if I had known who she was." "That's exactly the problem," my boss said, and her voice, though calm, carried a weight that filled the entire lobby. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with basic respect. You judged her before she said a single word that wasn't true. You assumed the worst about her simply because of how she looked. And the moment someone who looked more like what you expected walked through that door, you couldn't do enough to please her." The manager tried again to apologize, but she raised a hand gently, not unkindly but firmly. "I'm not interested in an apology to me," she said. "I want you to understand what you did to her." She turned to me then, and something in her eyes softened, something protective and proud all at once. "You didn't deserve a single second of what just happened to you," she said. "Not 1 second." I felt my throat tighten, not from sadness, but from something closer to relief, the kind of relief that comes when someone finally sees you exactly as you are without needing convincing. My boss then asked, calmly but firmly, to speak with the regional director of the bank. Word moved quickly. Within 30 minutes, a senior representative arrived at the branch, visibly nervous, aware that something serious had unfolded. My boss explained everything plainly, not with anger, but with the clarity of someone who had dealt with difficult rooms her entire career. She explained how her company held multiple accounts with that very bank, accounts worth significantly more than the $4 million that had just been torn apart on the counter. She explained that she would be reconsidering every single one of those accounts unless real action was taken, not simply a quiet apology behind closed doors, but real accountability, real training, real change in how customers were treated in that branch. The regional director apologized repeatedly, promising an internal investigation, a formal review of the manager's conduct, and a written apology to be issued directly to me. The manager stood off to the side during all of this, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by the quiet stillness of someone who understood, perhaps for the first time, the real weight of his own assumptions. A new check was issued that same day, verified, processed, and deposited without a single further question. But what stayed with me wasn't the money. It was the moment right before we left the bank, when my boss turned to me one last time and said something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. "They will always try to decide who you are before you say a word," she told me. "Your job isn't to prove them wrong every single time. Your job is to keep being exactly who you are, so clearly, so consistently, that eventually the truth speaks louder than their assumptions ever could." I thought about that a lot in the weeks that followed. I thought about how many times in my life I had walked into rooms where people decided, before I even opened my mouth, what I was capable of, what I deserved, what I could possibly be carrying with me. I thought about all the times I stayed quiet, swallowed the sting, and kept moving forward anyway because the alternative was letting someone else's ignorance define my worth. That day at the bank wasn't really about a torn check. It was about every single moment before it, every meeting where I was overlooked, every room where someone assumed I was in the wrong place, every conversation where I had to prove twice as hard that I belonged exactly where I stood. And it was about every moment after it too, the moment someone finally stood beside me and said, out loud in front of everyone, that I deserved better. I later learned that the manager was suspended pending review and eventually let go from his position entirely. Not because one company complained, but because it turned out others had experienced similar treatment from him before me, quietly, without anyone powerful enough standing beside them to make it matter. My story simply became the one that finally forced the truth into the light. I don't share this story because I want sympathy. I share it because I know so many of you have lived through your own version of that torn check. Maybe it wasn't a bank. Maybe it was a job interview where they looked at your resume like it had to be a mistake. Maybe it was a store where someone followed you a little too closely. Maybe it was a room where you had to work twice as hard just to be seen as equally capable. I know that feeling. I have lived that feeling more times than I can count. But here is what I have learned and what I want you to carry with you long after this video ends. Their assumptions are not your truth. Someone else's ignorance does not get to decide your worth. You keep showing up, you keep working. You keep building quietly and steadily until the truth becomes so undeniable that no one can tear it in half, no matter how hard they try. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever felt looked over, judged, or underestimated because of how you looked or where you came from, I want you to know you are not alone. Type "I see you" in the comments if this story reminded you of your own journey. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their worth was never up for someone else's approval. And if you want more stories like this one, real, raw, and honest, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because there are so many more stories just like mine waiting to be told. Because at the end of the day, they can tear up a piece of paper, but they can never tear up who you really are.